the Reclaim Social Care's co-production meeting. My name is Sandra Daniels, and I'm the acting chair of Reclaim Social Care, and I will be chairing the meeting this afternoon. Anne Bannister is hosting the meeting, and Gelda Peterson will be calling people who want to ask questions after the speakers have spoken. So everyone will be muted until they are called to speak, as we want to avoid background noise. We'd like people to raise their Zoom hand to signal to ask a question if possible. If this is not possible, please let us know how you can signal, so that we can agree on how we let you speak. So is there anybody that actually can't?
Sandra, you're on mute.
No, sorry, shall I start again? Sorry, okay.
Sorry, I muted everybody and didn't realise, of course, I muted you by mistake.
Oh, right, I'll start again then.
We got up to, Sandra, anyone that can you?
Oh, right, okay. So we're going to mute everybody. Sorry, I'm completely lost now. So we're going to mute everybody because of the noise, because we actually want to avoid background noise. And we'd like people to use the Zoom hand to speak. So when you want to ask the question, if you could raise the Zoom hand. If this is not accessible to you, could you please let us know now, so that we can agree another way, so that you can actually you can signal to speak?
Because you can go like this too.
So is there anybody that actually can't use the Zoom hand? Okay. So we also have sign language interpreters who will be signing throughout the meeting. So now, can I introduce our panel of speakers? So our first speaker is going to be Kevin Caulfield, and he's one of the strategic leads for co-production. He will be speaking on the way forward for co-production and how that's been developed in Hammersmith and Fulham. Our second speaker is going to be Gordon Peters, and he's the chair of Haringey Over 50s Forum, and he will be giving an overview on the changes to date. And we also have Liz, and Liz is going to pronounce her own surname, because it's quite a hard surname to pronounce. So can Liz actually be unmuted, please?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. It's Chikailo.
There you go. And Liz's mother lived and died in Osborne Grove care home, and she will be talking about the reinvestment and redesign of that home. The third speaker was going to be Andrew Lee, who is the director of People First Self-Advocacy, but unfortunately Andrew is not able to join us today, and he sent his apologies. I will be speaking, and I will be giving an insight into my role as an advocate working for People First Birmingham, supporting learning disabled people on the Learning Disability Partnership Board and the Local Authority User Involvement Group. So now it's over to Bob Williams-Finlay, who will give us an outline of why Reclaim Social Care is holding today's co-production meeting.
Okay, thank you. We believe, when done correctly, co-production is an effective principle and progressive way of working. The new economic foundation said that co-production is a relationship where professionals and citizens share power to design, plan, access and deliver support together. It recognises that everyone has a vital contribution to make in order to improve the quality of life for people and communities. Campaign bodies such as Reclaim and the newly created campaign for national care support and independent living service need to develop an understanding of how potentially powerful a tool like transformative co-production can be, not just for creating services, but also for campaigning. The foundation for six main parts to co-production, recognising people as assets. People are seen as equal partners rather than as passive receivers of burdens on society. Building on people's capabilities, people are supported to use what they are able to do to benefit their community, themselves and other people. Developing two-way reciprocal relationship or co-production involves some mutuality between those who are involved. Encouraging peer support networks. Peer and personal networks are often not valued enough and not supported. Co-production builds these networks, blurring boundaries between delivering and receiving services. The usual line between the people who create and deliver and those who use them is blurred with more people involved. And finally, facilitating, not delivering to. So public sector organisations like the government, local council and health authorities enable things to happen rather than provide services themselves. This point is often seen as a threat rather than an opportunity, but it doesn't need to be along marketisation or privatisation line. It can be about community-based services. So back to you, Sandra.
Thanks, Bob, for outlining that. Now we're handing over to Kevin. And he's going to do a PowerPoint presentation. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And I'm looking forward to the day that we can all meet in person when I can stop feeling like I'm speaking from down a well. So yeah, I think I would be kind of reinforcing a lot of what Bob said in his introduction, and take you on a journey through the long struggle and the work that we've done in Hammersmith and Fulham as disabled people to move towards implementation of real co-production working with residents. And as we go along, I'll try and, so co-production for us is not just an academic exercise, it's about doing it together that makes the change, doing it together where we are. And I will try and flag up what I can identify as the important mechanisms that we have used to change things. Because sometimes when we're speaking about what we're doing in Hammersmith and Fulham, it can seem like a lot and a lot to take in. So I would just say that I'm a senior officer working for the council now, and I'm in a job share with Tara Flood, who is also a disabled person, and we're leading on the implementation of co-production. Importantly, we both come as activists who have campaigned for a long time. We're also residents of Hammersmith and Fulham, so we identify ourselves as residents and not service users. And I also get a direct payment to deliver my realisation of independent living. So just make a few introductory comments. So everything I'm talking about comes from the movement's rally cry, which is nothing about disabled people without disabled people. Principles of the UN Convention, and that disabled people still are without doubt furthest away from decision making in all decisions that affect our lives. All of those decisions are currently made by non-disabled people. We struggle to, as non-disabled people, look at us through a medical and charity lens, which helps underpin our reality. The struggle is to change that perception and to challenge the uncomfortable truth that society does all of that to us. I would also say that social care, inverted commas, is just one pillar of independent living, and the campaign to co-produce independent living needs to reframe and push the narrative towards independent living. If we are going to change strategic or academic agreements on co-production into the specifics that really bring about change. So I'm going to
Kevin, can I just ask, did you want me to share the slides yet?
Yeah, if you put the front, yeah, if you can put the first slide up. So I'm just going to cover the background to campaigning work that we did, and that's how we all started campaigning as activists. A little bit about our Disabled People's Commission, which was the first local Disabled People's Commission in the country, and that's unique, and that's a mechanism for change. How we've identified co-production and what does that mean to us, and why has it been so important, and just give you an overview of the recommendations that the Disabled People's Commission made to embed co-production across the borough. And then a little bit of an explanation of where we are now in terms of who's taking the work forward in terms of implementing co-production. and a little bit about the shift from kind of personalisation, which is a process way of looking at delivering social care and independent living that's created by generally by professionals. And then just some quick reflections on what we think has been important to making it all work. And can you put the slides up? Anna, I can't see the slides.
Can anybody see the slides?
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay.
Yes, so can I. And I
Okay.
think
Okay, it's not on my
you
screen.
just tell Kevin what's up. He can talk to it.
Can you just go to the second slide, which heading's a bit of context?
Okay, it's got a bit of context for your change, but hard work, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. So really important, yeah, obviously we are starting to see real change, and that's been hard work. What the bedrock of where we started was over 10 years ago with local disabled people campaigning successfully for resisting the move to re-implement charging disabled people for home care, inverted commas, community support, or independent living support as we see it. So that was a huge campaign which involved lots of street action and lobbying council meetings and judicial review, two sets of high court proceedings against the local authority at that time. So just to say the outcome of that now in 2020, and this was implemented in 2015, the incoming council in 2014, which is a Labour administration, abolished home care charging. And now we're the only local authority in England that doesn't charge disabled people for independent living support. So that was a huge victory for local disabled people. But it also was a huge message from the leader of the council and the council that we could work together and that councillors could understand the barriers that disabled people face and that we could work together to bring about policy change. Quickly, some other things when the Independent Living Fund closed in 2015, the council ring-fenced everyone's Independent Living Fund care package, support package until 2021. And as we know, that in many local authorities where once the Independent Living Fund was closed, many people's support packages have been cut. We also campaigned around getting a new direct payment support service, which has been taken in-house, and that from January of this year is back in the community, run by the local disabled people's organisation and people who use direct payments. So really important victories and really important messages from the council that it is committed to working and changing policy and practice with disabled residents. So the campaigning bit was in the beginning, and then, as I said, we set up a Disabled People's Commission. So that commission was chaired by Tara Blood, but the great thing about it was all of the commissioners were local disabled residents. So we had no charities speaking on behalf of disabled people. We had no any other organisations or representation, just disabled people, by to cabinet members from the council to ensure that Yeah, and the remit was very open, so the Commission was able to look and seek evidence on any of the barriers that are faced by disabled residents and come up with solutions on how to change them. And there was no restriction on that, so often commissions are redirected by other influences and other uses. So in a nutshell, what we found, and as we all know, that disabled people's barriers are extensive, and so those systematic barriers required a systematic response. So not just picking on one or two issues like independent living or maybe housing, or we have to change the whole framework for working with residents if we're going to really achieve co-production and I would say independent living. So the solutions from the report, and there's 8 recommendations, and I can't remember if I shared the link with you to the Disabled People's Commission report. The eight recommendations are in that report. And just in terms of, like, so I said it would flag up mechanisms, you could take the Disabled People's Commission report, just take Hammersmith and Fulham off it and put in your local authority, and you will probably find that nearly all of the barriers and all of the solutions are very, very similar. And in a way, we as disabled people, we could have probably written the report before we started, because we're all steeped in facing that discrimination and exclusion on a daily basis. Next slide. So the next slide is just the front cover of the Disabled People's Commission report, and it just highlights the key findings. And you know, lots of people saying, many were saying that the quality of their life had gone down. Lots of people saying they had no voice in local decision making. But the good thing was that councillors and staff really want to work better with disabled residents. So the next slide is co-production, and what does it mean to us, and why is it important? I mean, we created a working definition, so it's not a tablet cast in stone, and lots of co-production work does not include references to disabled people. So for us, it's about disabled residents, decision makers, so people in the council, in the public sector, in health, working together to plan, design, review policy and services to get rid of the barriers that we face. And what's important is that we are the people, not non-disabled people. It has to come from us. We highlighted that existing co-production activities carried out by public sector bodies like councils in general do not consistently engage or attempt to engage disabled residents. The key principle is that we are experts in our own life, and that, you know, real co-production working together will start to address together the barriers to equality, diversity. And the report highlighted that the co-production needs real leadership, so that's leadership from disabled residents, from the leader of the council, in this case from senior officers, the chief executive, all working together. And that people need to find lots of aspiration, and we need to have high expectation. We need to have high expectation of what we want to see in the change. So the next slide is just on the 8 recommendations. and you'd need to read the report to really kind of get to grips with them. Because of time, I'm just going to kind of flow through them really, but we need to change the way that we work to create a human rights approach, a more social model approach of the way that the council operates. We need a strategy across the organisation, and that has to come with a delivery plan. Getting to that point on independent living, we'll talk a little bit later. Scaling everyone up to work better together, so training and mentoring and creating spaces for people to learn together. So professionals usually do their training on their own, and counsellors do their training on their own, and disabled residents actually rarely get opportunities to be involved in training more skills, create a better learning environment. Yeah, and then just developing communications around co-production and working together. Importantly, recommendation 7 is about strengthening disabled residents and organisations of disabled people to be able to work with the council, because without disabled people and residents, then the other 7 recommendations will fail, because you can't co-produce change without people to co-produce the change with. So again, nothing about disabled people without disabled people. Yeah, so and disabled people that be more involved in making, creating support and services that's able to deliver what we need. Some headway in developing a budget for our work. So it's the first year, and we've got a budget for co-production activities. The council has never had a budget for co-production activities up until now, and then we need to create some independent monitoring evaluation that comes independently of all of us, so that the monitoring and evaluation is effective, and that we see as being getting up as well a local team of disabled evaluators. Next slide. So the next slide is just a photograph of, we have a co-production implementation group. So we've moved now from the work of the commission, which was the fact finding and the evidence building. We've got the 8 recommendations. Now we have an implementation group, and the photograph just shows the disabled residents, the chief executive, the 4
No sound.
3 members who are part of the implementation group. So importantly, disabled residents, counsellors and senior officers are reflected in this group, and that's the level of co-production that we want to see working across the council. So as I said to you at the beginning, we're kind of in early days and early stages, but this makeup, the very just makeup of the group is very, very important. So the next slide is just a bit of an overview of where co-production has started. Well, I would say the general buzz around disabled people's issues, disabled people's rights has, I would just say that me and Tara have been in that post for about 18 months. So the profile of disabled people's rights and issues has gone up hugely. I can't even explain how much it's changed. The disabled residents have been, for example, involved. We've got a disabled residents team that have been working on the redesign of our town hall and surrounding area, social housing. Disabled people have been involved in that all the way through for nearly 3 years. They're paid, which is another important principle that we think disabled people cannot be really around the table, not being paid. It's just there's a fundamental principle. Disabled people have co-produced their disabled people's housing strategy, about to launch probably in January. We had a voter registration campaign, for example, which was targeted at disabled residents. So before, disabled people were not reflected in any of the promotional materials encouraging and offering support for people to vote. So now we have 3 posters of 3 different. So these are just some examples of things that have changed. And one of the council's key aims is doing things with residents, not to them, which is very noble and it's lovely and it sounds great. So what we say is co-production, working together, is the mechanism to make doing things with residents, not to them, a reality. So, the next slide. So importantly for today, as I said in the beginning, that we have now, the council has adopted a new vision statement on independent living as defined by disabled people. I did share that with Anne. I don't know if we can share that afterwards. So that comes with a commitment to co-produce an independent living delivery plan with residents. So that work will start in the new year. We're really excited about that. And we hope that if we can really get that going, we can use that to inspire other disabled people's organisations and disabled people and other local authorities to take a similar tack. So we reviewed our direct payment budget support in the borough. The review was carried out by an external disabled people's organisation, so from another borough, a disabled people's organisation carried out the research. That's extremely rare to have that situation with disabled people coming in and interviewing staff and residents, and coming up with recommendations for change on direct payment support. And then from that, we co-produced the direct payment improvement, and we co-produced a direct payment support service specification for the new direct payment support. And that service specification, that contract, adopts a commitment to Article 19, independent living, as part of that specification. So that for us is another groundbreaking. We've managed to carry out disability equality training, 250 frontline staff last year, including all senior managers, the senior leadership team of the council, and all councillors. So that's part of, and again, it's very early days, it's a part of shifting the culture and shifting the lens that people look at us through, moving people away from the medical model, the charity model. We've just developed a co-production commissioning checklist with staff to try and up the amount of co-production activities that are taking place, because we are the entire one post. The job set is just one job, so we need to accelerate the amount that's taken. The next slide, just to say, this is COVID-19. It's an unprecedented time. the disproportionate impact on marginalised communities and particularly disabled people is nothing short of a disaster, really. Restrictions have really changed the way that we've been doing things. So, but you know, we have a huge surge in community action, and we're trying to kind of harness that. And co-production is one of the council's key priorities for co-producing the way forward, and using the jargon of recovery. And so we don't develop a strategy around recovery. It does not include disabled people. It does not include. So the next slide we need.
Kevin, can you just make sure that you can speak into your mic? The sound keeps going and coming. I don't know whether it's technical issues. I think we're losing connection with Kevin.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you now. Yeah,
Okay.
your sound keeps coming and going, so I'm not sure
There's
if
something
it's...
that happens with the mute. I'm not touching the computer.
Okay,
So,
fair enough.
So where were we? Can we move on to reflections on what has worked?
I've got the slide up, but what about COVID-19, Kevin?
Yeah, so did you hear anything I said then?
No.
Okay, so I'll just quickly say that, obviously it's unprecedented times. There's been a disproportionate impact on disabled people, atrocious impact on disabled people. And lockdown restrictions obviously have changed the way that we do things. But we've also seen a huge surge in community action, and you know, there's an opportunity for us to work, and we're now working with wider groups of residents around co-production. So we've always said that co-production is not just for disabled residents; it's for all residents, and this kind of created a bit of an opportunity to help. As lots of people are talking about inverted commas, planning for recovery, co-production is one of the councils for kind of key commitments to co-producing the recovery. So the next slide is just really quickly reflections on what we think has worked. So really important is building relationships with local politicians where you can. I mean, they are, at the end of the day, the decision makers, spending our money and resources as residents. And many of you will know, including myself, who we've been working for 20 years up through, just through council officers. That is often a struggle, and there's a limit to what that can achieve. So councillors really are elected to facilitate, as Bob says at the beginning, facilitate a relationship of working with residents, and officers are supposed to carry out policy decisions made by councillors. So really important to target that relationship, and to kind of build a joint vision together and trust. That time when disabled people have been out in the cold or excluded time and time again, that's a hard process, but by doing things and delivering things, you start to build trust, because people can see, okay, it's worth doing this because it leads to some change. The Disabled People's Commission is a reflection of what has worked It's a very important mechanism for bringing together residents, councillors, staff in a strategic kind of cross council decision-making process, and that also helped to build trust. So I think from this to take away as well that people should be campaigning for their own mechanism, whatever that looks like locally, to ensure that you have that level of action. I think what I said earlier, just the leadership from disabled people and councillors and senior officers, and that's reflected in our implementation group. Yeah, and just trying as best as you can to build good alliances with directors and who actually are the budget holders and effective kind of people who make decisions on what happens. So it's important to kind of work positively where we can. So I know that's quite a lot and I'm going to stop there, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of what we've done, but I hope it was some of the mechanisms, and co-production for us is a mechanism. It's a coat hanger to bring people together. It's not an academic exercise, as I said, and it's who can be opposed to co-production. It brings, we're using it as a mechanism, as a way to bring people together. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kevin. That was. Now I'm going to hand over to Gordon and Liz. So the next speakers are Gordon and Liz.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Is that all right for volume? Thank you. Okay, I'll talk for about 5 or 6 minutes only, I think, and then Liz will give a bit more personal experience of our co-design process. I think I should say I'm here as a fully retired person, although I do a lot of voluntary work, it seems. Chair of Haringey Over 50s Forum, and I'm in Reclaim Social Care, and I'm a member of the Haringey Unite community branch, the trade union, and a community rep on adult social care redesign in Haringey. However, maybe I should also say that for 50 years, I was a social worker, and in the 1980s, director of social services in London Borough of Hackney, where for a while we developed a full social model of care and a universalist anti-discrimination human rights-based approach, despite the onslaught of the Thatcher attack on social work, which it really was, and the cuts in social services. So coming from that, I'm very much on board with what's been said so far, and Bob's point about a national care and support for independent living service, which I'm fully supporting as far as possible. Jumping forward 30 years, we see austerity and inequality and effect on disabled people, on women, on any marginalised group that you can think of being so much worse. But perhaps only now are the long active voices for fair and equal determination of decent social care and support, which some of us have fought for so long, now being recognised again. So now is the time, I think, for co-production and co-design to become a mainstream. But there are two real dangers in authorities turning to local communities and their users and carers to find solutions to huge financial cuts, which we're also going through. And it's not uncritically that we take on the call for co-production of care and support, those of us on the community side in Haringey. As I'm sure many on this call know only too well, we could become co-agents of limiting our own support rather than enhancing it if we go along with financial stringency. And that's a very, very difficult struggle in which many of us are engaged. But I want to say a few things about co-production now in Haringey, which hasn't come out of nowhere, and it's still got a long way to go. But I will talk about achievements so far in a positive light, certainly. Haringey Council committed itself to reform of social care in the borough from its 2018 manifesto, with the aim of reviewing daycare for adults and restoring two-day centres which were scheduled for closure, reversing domiciliary care in line with the Ethical Care Charter of Unison, and reversing a decision to close Osborne Grove Nursing Home, the last local authority nursing home in England as it happens. The rest are NHS ones. This followed successful campaigns to oppose the closures and to overturn a sell-off of council assets by the previous Labour administration called the Haringey Development Vehicle. I make these points because on the back of a lot of local activity and opposition to some of the things that were happening in the borough, a better reformed and we hope co-designed way of providing social support is now beginning to come about. In the reform of adult social care, the principles of co-design and co-production are central. And there's a Hornsey Pensioners Action Group, which I'm also a member of, website link which people might want on the principles of co-design, but they're very much related to those which Kevin was talking about. Nothing about us without us. And the principles of co-design then based on an equal place at the table, equal between users or carers and professionals or politicians, rather than being talked down to or tolerated, if you like. That had been established in joint work between user and carer groups in the borough and the council for several years before 2018, but with tentative rather than transformational progress. Now, in as far as the machinery of local government itself can be either an obstacle or it can be a facilitator regarding social care and support, we established a planning and oversight group for social services with the council's full agreement and implementation. It had a built-in majority of user, carer and community reps. And there were also established reference groups for each identified population of users and carers, which reported to a joint partnership board with the council and CCG officers. And the lead member, ex officio, was on that. That was a precursor for areas of co-design, which I want to now outline. There were three points on the structures that perhaps are worth noting. They are advisory, these structures, and we now have a community advisory board with direct access to the cabinet. So they have influence, but they do not of themselves tackle any power imbalance. But they are built on a demonstrated voice and capacity for action of representative groups locally. Secondly, they do address previous breakdown in trust, which did exist, and many users and carers will tell you all about that. And they need to build back up between the local authority and many of those most at risk. And thirdly, these structures do engender a kind of public provision, which is not just a last resort, but rather supportive of where people in need are and want to be. And is locally sourced, values mutuality, respects the dignity of all, and is empowering wherever it can be. So it's a way station towards something more transformational, having co-design in place. In domiciliary home care, firstly, the market had wrought a degree of havoc in the provision of those isolated most in need, as many of us here will be aware. And the ever tighter eligibility criteria exclude even basic preventive work for those not in the highest category of assessed need. We had the Sevacare scandals, which many will have heard about, a large corporation providing home care, 50-minute time visits by home care workers, many instances of a person being left without basic attention to their health and respect, while the home care worker went from place to place without even payment for that time. After banning Sevacare from providing in Haringey, and a lot of local pressure as well, of course, significant groundswell led to a different policy altogether and a tribunal decision in 2020, which actually gave £100,000 to underpaid staff on the basis of a case they took. They were providers in Haringey for a company. Haringey then adopted Unison's Ethical Care Charter in full, not just in part, abandoning short-time allocation of visits, paying travel time, paying statutory sick pay for workers, no zero-hour contracts, continuity of worker for client, the London living wage, and training and access to co-workers for the home care deliverers. That was the basis of a new contract which came about only within the last year. Then set up a panel with user and community reps on redesigning the home care contract, to which any bidding provider would have to subscribe and be monitored on. This new contracting system greatly reduces the number of providers to 1 or 2 per district, and there are 3 districts in the borough, emphasises coordination with preventive work by others, and is locally sourced wherever possible. It's not then in-house, nor does it abolish charging as Hammersmith and Fulham have done, but it is a step towards a local partnership in home care and community support for everyone who needs it, which will maximise local resources and recruit local skills. The Development Steering Group for Home Care and Community Support, with union and community reps, is in a position to argue for embedding further co-production in home care so that we could end up with a totally locally appropriate, more cooperatively produced model. But we're on the way to something like that. In daycare, the Adult Social Care Redesign Group has set about involving carers and users of services for learning disabled and autistic people directly in reconceiving the form and amount of care and support to be provided in two-day centres now saved from closure, Roundway and The Haven, and in reconfiguring other day opportunities. Long way to go, but it's a very good start. Services for older people are part of an age-friendly borough approach, including a dementia-friendly alliance, and an Age Well Partnership Board, which is leading on reducing isolation and supporting community interventions with these jointly commissioned with with user groups. That's the important point. Examples are walking buddies, IT buddies, wellbeing coaches, and so on. And that's a catalyst for the NHS, which are a bit behind the local authority in terms of co-design, because of course professional separation is much greater perhaps in the NHS than it is in local authorities. People like myself can go back to the CBOM report in the Local Authority Act and Social Services Act of 1970, which actually established some kind of equality, believe it or not, between professionals and people who receive services. Just so much of that's been eroded. We need to recreate it. But the model we're developing in Haringey is not dissimilar to what's called the Burkzorg neighbourhood care model in the Netherlands, which is clearly about neighbourhood care as a means of professional delivery, which is a way of getting around the thing Bob talked about as well, which is, and so did Kevin, the sort of doing things to people rather than doing things with. And that's locally determined mainly at ward and park neighbourhood level, where most of the initiatives are now taking place, and the more greater likelihood of local people actually having a real say in the setting up of these initiatives. The use of what are deemed community assets, such as housing, block community spaces, and supporting mutual aid activities, especially post-pandemic, are going to be key. A new disabled people's organisation, Disability Action Haringey, will now be central to co-producing support for people with disabilities. And that is getting full support from the council. And it is run by the people themselves who identify with disabilities. And lastly, from me, the last home for older people with continuous care needs run by Haringey, Osborne Grove Nursing Home, which was subject to a cabinet decision to close in 2018, prior to the new Labour Council, is now being completely redesigned and rebuilt in a £30 million plus project to expand its bed provision for a much needed population group, and at the same time be a site for day and community support, especially for carers and family living nearby. So not only did we save that, but actually we and people at Liz, who will be with you in a minute or so, are actually part of determining what it looked like and monitoring the building of it and everything to do with it. The OG&H Co-Design Group has the overall remit for the development and is founded in co-production with local stakeholders. There is a terms of reference for that, which Anne might be able to put up on the screen briefly, if that's possible. So that from conception through to delivery, there we are, the input of people with most experience locally will be a central consideration alongside architects, local authority and CCG personnel, union reps and councillors. And Liz and I have already been involved in a tender evaluation for the first part of that. Now, Liz, whose mother spent nearly the last decade of her life in Osborne Grove, is going to talk about her experience and hopes for co-designing this important site in the south of Haringey. So having given you a brief overview of the change in daycare and how it's provided, home care and how it's provided, and the one main residential facility we have, the last is perhaps the most exciting of these, and I'll leave Liz to talk about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. So Liz, over to Liz.
Yes, so let me just share my screen really quickly. I'm going to share some images of myself and my mother and my family, because I think it's quite appropriate, because it's really about her journey, if that's okay. Just while I talk about it, just a few images. Okay. So I'm really going to mostly share about why I'm here in this group today, and why I'm part of the Osborne Grove Nursing Home co-design group, steering group. And like probably many of you here, we come together really kind of out of needs for ourselves and our families, you know, and our loved ones, so we can live in compassionate, kind of supportive situations. My mother was a strong, quite elegant woman, you know, very able, very kind of self-determined, that developed dementia, probably possible Lewy bodies, you know, and she basically lost everything, lost her home, everything. And so she moved in with us in 2006. My kids were, at the time, they were 8 and 10. They're a bit younger here, but I was the main earner for the family, and my brother and my father had passed away in the early 90s. Simply my caring responsibilities were sandwiched, if you like, and we needed to turn to the community, to the council for support. You know, Ruby's dementia drove her to wander, and because of this, she needed constant support. She was in adult daycare, and that was a godsend for us. And Ruby seemed happy there, and it wasn't just because, it was also good for our family, because I was able to still work, and more importantly, raise my kids. You know, adult daycare sustained a balance until 2008, when Ruby wandered for 12 hours. And this led to her moving into a residential care home, which was painfully the opposite of what we want in social care, or what I would want in social care. What I didn't want for Ruby. Ruby weakened after a long stay in hospital. She moved into Osborne Grove in early 2010 she was predicted to live for weeks, if at best, maybe even days. And in fact, she almost died in the first 24 hours of the move. You know, but I believe the warmth and the care that she received at Osborne Grove nursing home led to her living for almost 10 years afterwards. So my involvement in the co-design group evolved from the, as Gordon said, the Save the Osborne campaign, to keep the nursing home open and to direct any refurbishment, and to keep my mother safe in the home after the council, Haringey Council, announced the building was going to close due to building issues at the end of 2017. Our protest meetings turned into the co-design steering group, which I kept going to after my mother passed away in 2019, really mostly for those that were still in the home and for their families. But I was really struck by and very thankful for the Save the Osborne nursing home campaigners like Gordon and Mary and Lords and Eldridge and Mike, that I guess I found myself a permanent member of this co-design group after the home's closure in March 2020. So, you know, why was that? And it's ironically because people's needs can get lost in the planning and design of such a complex community projects. And it's good to have someone in the group that remembers the lived experience of the people that were in there. Breaking down and developing such a massive project like this new kind of development means, which starts kind of as an ethereal, it started off as an ethereal sense with Gordon leading it, a sense of what could be, runs a risk of what I call rationalization of design priorities, such as practical issues of budgets, construction in the community, and safety and long-term feasibility. So we proposed, Gordon leading this, an opening up of Osborne Grove to be front-facing in the community, a place for our local third generation to access support and ensure confidence. And, you know, such kind of issues like banal practical issues like how to deal with technology systems, to reassure the inevitable health issues, and to emotive issues such as companionship and purpose. A place where people could move through all the levels of support and age well with confidence and dignity. Architects, designers, and planners are great at looking through the lenses of important issues such as the way light falls on the outside of the building, clustering versus hotel approaches, maximizing space, health and safety, all the kind of things that they're trained for, you know. You know, during COVID, I want to say that at the Whittington Hospital, they you know, moved in the kind of overfill of the hospital into Osborne Grove Nursing Home for those people who had to stay longer in the hospital. And there's a woman on the team named Emily from the co-design steering group that ran Osborne Grove Nursing Home and amazingly gathered, you know, all this information about the way the building functions and analysis from the perspectives of flow, facilities, and you know, kind of staff experience. So the way that I see my involvement in the process is to be the reminder in the meetings and the tenure evaluations of the people's lived experience in all the stages, from planning, tender and design. And I will be a nuisance, I don't care. You know, from the idea that, you know, there needs to be clean, bright rooms and private spaces for families to chat, to read, to watch TV together, you know, to have privacy and for people to have access to the sun on their faces easily. Little things like that. You know, as I found myself very often, spaces where you need to kind of sleep on the floor or a chair at crucial times when you think that you just need to be there. So my mother, Ruby, went into the Whittington hospitals 5 days before she died. I mean, she was in and out of there. And in those 5 days, it was filled with, you know, love and laughter, and you know, our family and friends kind of came together and really kind of celebrated and remembered her life. And I was there kind of next to her when she passed away. And, you know, I just, you know, want to see that, you know, it was a really lovely thing, and that all stages, you know, can be possible and of top potential at this new Osborne Grove Nursing Home, and simply to remind people there to design from the inside out. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I think now what we'll do is we'll go on to our break. So we're going to have a 10-minute break just to give people a bit of comfort, a bit of time off. So can we all come back in 10 minutes? And obviously we'll continue the discussion and have some question and answers for the speakers. Thank you. Hi everyone, are we all back? So we'll start back now. I'm not going to actually speak because we are sort of very short of time. So my speech, what will happen is that we'll send it out as additional information to everybody after the meeting. So now we have the opportunity to ask questions to the panel of people that have spoken. So would anybody like to ask a question? And if you say who the question is for, that would be really helpful.
I have no raised hands at the moment.
Oh, we have one, Gelda.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi. Well, it's for everyone, but really specifically for Kevin, because I am completely amazed by everything I've heard. I just briefly say, I'm at the stage of dreaming about what Kevin has achieved and spout out in those slides, in terms of I've got a tiny group of 4 disabled people in my area of Bath, and we've got the meeting set up with director of social care, and it's been brutal. It's been absolutely hostile. We're just getting to the stage where we're writing our own terms and conditions for us to meet again, because it was so they were so resistant to us being equals and wanting to hear anything that we would say. It all came back because they brought in unfair charges. So I wondered, yeah, like everyone keeps saying, if we were able to have Kevin's slides, how could we present that? Can we show them as Kevin's presentation in full, or should we take some of it and try to make it more generic? What would be the best way of me, because I've got a meeting in January and I would like to, if Kevin is up for that, I would like to be able to explain to my very sorry backward head of social work some of these concepts. So should I take Kevin's slides if he was willing? I think that might be the best way to start, but then should I try and personalize, or make it also look like some of it's come from our group? What does Kevin think? What do you think? Thanks.
So over to Kevin. Kevin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I mean, well, after this meeting, we are going to circulate the slides, the vision statement for independent living, and links to the Disabled People's Commission report, and our co-production. Hold on. Right. Okay. And our co-production webpage. So I think, I mean, you can use those, and I mean, what we've said is say that people can just use what we've done and say, look, if another area can facilitate and work together with disabled residents at this level, so it's far beyond consultation and tick box user engagement, and it's about really disabled people being involved, strategically about making decisions.
But because you've
but
done all the work.
I also think
Yeah.
the important relationship is with councillors and cabinet members, and if you can facilitate a meeting with them or a councillor or two to start the conversation, that also may be helpful. I think you can use the slides whichever way feels more comfortable to you. I mean, or you could use the slides and then kind of develop a couple of slides of your own that kind of personalise it to a local level and what you want to see.
Thank you, but Kevin, because you've done all the work, are you thinking to sort of like present us who are interested with, like, it's almost, I don't want to use that awful word branding, but it's like you've done all the kind of conceptual framework. I don't know whether anyway, perhaps we can have this conversation also again, group with emails, because I would, it's exactly what my council needs to hear how you've laid it out, and it's what we've been trying to articulate but couldn't, as we didn't have the language. And I've seen your slides, although they may appear but sort of clear and simple, they're not, because they carry huge concepts behind them.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's better to use your slides as your work, and then develop, I don't know, but I think you could almost give it to us as a toolkit, or to other people who are going to come to these. Is this a steering committee now? I'm not even sure what this is, this meeting, but these are the kind of toolkits that people who are trying to engage in the fight back, and the necessary fight back, you know, that's an amazing toolkit that you have put together.
I mean, to be honest, we're so busy because we're just one post with all of this, that it's been a bit of a, and it's always the issue that we haven't got around to producing enough resources and enough templates and things that people can use. So, but I mean, I said earlier, if you look at the report, and if you can read it, sorry, the report is an easy read version. There is only one report, and it is an easy read version. And I said you could effectively change the name and put in Bath instead of Hammersmith and Fulham. All of the issues are pretty much going to be the same. Yeah. But I mean, I think if you absorb the report, and then you could also use that to say to them, we want this level of working together, decision making, and we need to start. And maybe, and you need to always start somewhere. Yeah. So we started with, we just focused on charging, even though we knew there were a million other issues. Once we got one or two successes, then it started to snowball.
Yeah.
And as you probably, you know, at the beginning, lots of disabled people, in fact, said to us, no, please don't challenge them anymore, because they'll just take away the measly amounts that we've got. And
really, so it's better to challenge.
That is the exact opposite of what has happened. Everything that we've got came through that initial challenge, and in a way puts you on the map. If there are no at the beginning.
I want to say
hang on a minute, so we have got others wanting to come in.
I was just going to say we have got some other questions.
We've got Janet Shapiro and Robert Sale waiting to come in.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gelda. But what I'm thinking is that if Kevin we can share Kevin's slides in the information we send out after the meeting, and the report as well, then that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Is that a way forward?
And our contact details are on the slide.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for that question. Who's next, Gelda?
It's Janet Shapiro and then Robert Sale. Janet first.
Yes. Hello. I've unmuted myself. I wanted to ask what the implications were of the current trend from NHS England to drive through integrated care systems that are designed to increase privatisation opportunities, and have not, certainly in London, have not involved any involvement of local councillors. And I believe it was a councillor from Hammersmith and Fulham that wrote a very good paper explaining just where they were sidelined. Now, this must have implications, because the whole success of having a support system for independent living will depend upon the budgets working properly. And certainly we haven't had any democratic input, and there's certainly a reduction in any sort of consultation or anything. In the chat line, Gordon mentioned a meeting which is being held in London called Under Cover of COVID, which is trying to expose the tendency, the trend towards privatisation that the government wants. So this must be relevant, but it's not been mentioned so far.
Okay, Gordon, have you got anything to add to what's been said? Is Gordon gone? Okay, all right. Shall we take the next question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm unmuted quickly. Yeah, I support what Janet's saying completely. This agenda of privatisation by stealth and out front, which is going on all the time in the NHS, and social care has been subject to it for the last 30 or more years, is what's helped produce the crisis more than anything else. And the short answer is really the more co-design we get and the more equality of people around the table and the more we insist on that at any meetings with the NHS people, including the senior officers who run these things, who are not used to democratic accountability in the way that councillors at least are, is to insist on that right to be around the table and embarrass them into sort of having to admit that they need to talk to other people. I think co-design is a very, very important way into that. But of course, the bigger policy implications are we must have a commitment to collective provision and decommodifying care altogether. But co-design actually is a way of helping to decommodify it and to tackle, to show an alternative to privatisation. That's my short answer.
Thank you. Who's next, Gelda?
Got Robert Sale, then followed by Brian Gibbons and Gary Hatt.
Okay.
Robert Sale first.
Oh, hi, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Robert Sale. I was late, actually. I'm really glad I didn't miss Liz's presentation. I thought it was all like that. This has been a great meeting. I'm a member of a mental health service users group in Harrow in London, and we are going through a situation where it looks like a very well-loved mental health day centre is about again to be threatened with closure due to cuts. And we had a very successful campaign before, but now it was one of those ones where the solution was we'll keep it going for 3 years. At the end of that time, you've got to find enough money to keep it going. Well, of course, they've employed a consultant, I think, where it's probably for much about 50 grand. It was in like the last one to say that wasn't going to work. Well, we told them that 3 years ago. Now, the point is that I absolutely agree that we need to listen to people with lived experience. I mean, that's what we're campaigning for. But sometimes I feel that the word co-production we're going to put users at the centre and the holistic pathway, what I now call penny dashery. I think there's plenty of people who understand what that is. And really what you've got is reorganising the deck chairs on the Titanic. And they make a thing of bringing in co-production. And the problem, of course, is that we have to usually acknowledge there is an inequality of power. And when some of those people start exercising their power, they find themselves defined as troublemakers and off the panel. And I wanted to hear from, if you haven't covered this already, and that's what's happening, I think, or they're trying to do that, because you've got a lot of voluntary organisations and they're all in the marketplace now. It's not because they're nasty people, but that's the real world. And so, you know, it's what you might call the usual suspects, and they have one or two people in there and they call it co-production. How have you got around that kind of thing? And presumably if you come up against real problems like, well, we haven't got the money and we're just about to serve a section 114, you know, how do you deal with that? And the positive thing from COVID, if there is one, is that there's so many people now are not going to take that view, sorry, there's no money for this, and we're not going back to the old normal. We've got to sort of see things in that way. So how do you deal with that tokenistic co-production? And it's all that language, but actually what they want you to do is to get together and help them, not make them make the cuts. Those people don't want to make the cuts either. But that's the sort of point I wanted to make. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Which member of our panel wants to come in on that, just briefly, to answer that question?
I'm happy to say something.
Thank you, Kevin.
It's an absolute, I mean, that's absolutely right. I'm sure there are loads of people on this call that have been on the receiving end of tokenistic, and it's not called co-production. In the report, I won't go into it. There's a section on what is not co-production, and residents' responses initially was.
Oh, I can't hear very well. I don't know if it's just my. I can't hear Kevin.
Can anyone else hear me?
That's better.
We can hear if you speak straight into the machine. I think that's Kevin.
Yeah, it's because of my impairment. It's sometimes difficult. So, yeah. So what I was saying is that lots of people on this call will have been on the receiving end of bad co-production, user engagement, because there's not really a global framework within organisations to make it work. And in our report, we describe from disabled people's perspective what is not co-production. And residents' comments on this sounds like the same old rubbish as before. So that is our challenge to councillors and officers, that we are not perpetuating this kind of cycle of misery. And as I said, we're trying to do it strategically, and we're at the beginning, but we have recruited, we've advertised for particular pieces of work, we've been paying people, and success breeds success. So increasingly more and more people are going to want to get involved. But if you do tokenistic production, people won't want to be involved in that, because as you quite rightly said, it's same old. So that's a huge challenge for all of us to deliver on that.
Thank you, Kevin. Who's next? The next speaker? The next question, sorry.
Brian Gibbons.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very good presentation so far, and very exciting and encouraging in terms of the big picture. What I'm interested in is from the point of view of the individual service user. How do these changes that we've heard about today affect the individual service user in terms of their assessment and in terms of how they actually fashion the service that's being personally delivered to them?
Can I say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gordon, maybe you might have something on this.
I think it is a very good question, because structures and things themselves don't necessarily get into people's lives, but I think it's a question of promoting how the service is delivered, and the professionals, the managers doing it, have to actually be convinced, or forced if necessary, by the co-producers working with them, that they tell everyone who's getting a service that this is the way it's being produced, whether they do that by bits of paper, by messages, by how they talk about it. It's a sort of re-educating of the senior workforce often, so that their sense of themselves as the only experts in the world has to be challenged. Now, an individual user often is, especially in medical settings, not in a position to do that. In social support, social care, social service settings, people are usually supposed to be trained to actually not have all the answers themselves, whereas medics tend to be put in the position of either having all the answers or the patient accepting that they're the ones who know best. So it's a question of how the service is communicated and knowing that individual user knowing that there are other people involved in it other than just the one person that he or she sees from time to time as the voice of authority. The voice of authority has to be forced or negotiated to say to people to whom it delivers a service that we are not the only voice doing this. There are other people involved and you have a right to talk to them. And there are various technical ways of doing that, I think.
So sorry, on that basis then, Gordon, what you're saying is that probably the individual service user, it's still very much a hit and miss as to whether or not they would actually, or their family would actually perceive any real change.
I really need to say something as a disabled person. I really need to respond to that. Maybe I could do that after this next.
Okay.
Well, we have one more speaker as well waiting.
That for me didn't cover it at all, so I do need to say something.
Maybe after Gary Hatt. Can we have Lara after Gary? Sorry, Sandra, you can.
Gary's next.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've really enjoyed it, listening to the various speakers and looking at the various comments. Now, what I would say is, looking at Kevin's slides, that's a sort of template sort of thing you need to be, or we need to be looking at to really as a starting point to push forward as a centralised point, because otherwise the first thing that central government does, they'll go to disabled organisations and get their views and everything else. We all know what's going to happen. They're going to say, oh, we haven't got the money, etc., etc. Usual story. But how can we convince them on our points that we really mean business and we really want change to happen and not go back to the norm and go back to square one again? So could anyone sort of point me in a direction of what we're looking to do as regards getting it funded, etc., and getting this pushed through by certainly central government going down to local authority level?
Well, I might say quickly something that Bob mentioned at the beginning, Reclaim Social Care supporting something called the National Care and Support for Independent Living Service. The acronym for that would be NACSILS, N-A-C-S-I-L-S. And I think that's on the Reclaim Social Care website. Now that asks for nationally funded, from progressive taxation, fully funded care for support for independent living. And there's 7 demands in it, which are quite straightforward for any political grouping or party. Hopefully the Labour Party is going to take that on to put into action. So I think that national campaign is very, very important. And co-production is within that, is something that we want to back, but there has to be national funding for it. So I would say get a hold of that National Care and Support for Independent Living Service, NACSILS document. Perhaps somebody can put it on before we finish.
Right, I really need to say my bit now because I'm going to forget, and I'm feeling a bit worried about the fact that the conversation has gone to this idea of what difference would it make to the service that I would receive, for example. So I am with a long-term rare breathing condition that I was born with. Normally I would be getting on with my life as a fine artist, for which I'm trained, but due to this far-right nightmare that we find ourselves in, every aspect of my life is now challenged by government policy. So I've had to give up my entire year because, for example, my local authority, what they did is they brought in a new charging care framework. They did this because the Care Act allows them to do it. They don't have to do it. They have zero understanding of disability equality. So they brought in a sham consultation. They wrote a fake equality impact assessment report. I didn't know anything about how you write an equality impact assessment report. I've learned on the hoof. I've seen those reports. I tried to take the whole council to judicial review, and I would have done so. I had the lawyers. Unfortunately, legal aid is discriminatory against disabled people. Seniors are allowed up to 10,000 in savings, which is similar to benefits. Disabled people must not have a penny over 3,000, otherwise it's taken almost in full for your legal costs. So where did that leave me? It meant I had no voice in terms of expressing why their new charging framework was based on a load of fakery. So my only option has been to try to form this little group and have conversations with the director of social care, who is, if you like, the corporate side of it. But we will over time try to, of course, talk about the conceptual issues of we would like to be able to, supposedly now we're supposed to be able to write our own care statements. Well, my local authority has never once mentioned that. I mean, the issues are so multiple, but going back to the other question of the last question, of course, unfortunately, we can't really change anything until we get rid of a far-right regime, but in the meantime, we have...
Would you wind up, because we've just got a queue of people?
That's it, that's all I want to say, is that I'm a bit shocked that I'm at this meeting having to explain this, but thanks, yeah.
No, and I think it's about culturally how assessments are delivered by the local authority. So pretty much it's about, why do we have to have our care needs assessed? It should be about us saying about our lives, disabled people saying about their lives and having the support that they need. So we need to change that culture, because while we're being assessed on our needs, it will always be an issue. So I think that's the campaign and what we need to be working on. Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Okay, who's next, Gelda?
Bob. Bob's wanting to come in.
Oh,
Bob
brilliant.
Williamson.
Okay.
Bob, you...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Sandra just said part of what I was going to say, but I need to put in context. Some people don't understand what independent living is about, because it's about a whole of people's lives. So disabled people have impairment. That's the only difference to anyone else. So non-disabled people, on the 1st of July every year, they'll have to assess their lifestyle. So why do disabled people? What affect them in terms of our lifestyle are the barriers that we face and the type of support we need to live our life. So that is really the shift that this culture that Sandra talks about, and that is why the natural and the campaign by We Came Up With Our Futures want to shift the agenda so that we create a holistic way of looking at people's lives. And also, we need to remember that from day one of disabled people organising to take control of their life and to end their exclusion that we've been totally opposed to in-house services that somehow non-disabled people provide support. So when we talk about public ownership, we're not talking about going back to the old way of the 1990s where council run services with a whole different approach.
Thank you for that, Bob. Thanks very much. We'll just take one more question and then we're going to...
Haven't got anyone, Sandra, with a hand. Can't see any other hands up.
Okay, thank you, Gelda. Thank you. Okay, so thanks for that discussion. I think because we're coming very close to the end of the meeting, I think we need to wind up. Wanted to talk about recently Sean Vasey, who was an officer of Reclaimed Social Care, passed away. Bob is going to read out a poem he wrote, and he read out at the celebration of her life yesterday. Followed by the poem. We're going to have a minute silence, if that's okay, for Sean. Over to Bob.
Okay. There was something, or there was always something charming about Sean, especially when she wanted you to do something for her. There was always something alarming too, in the fact that she often had you wrapped around her finger before you could even notice. There was always something irresistible when it came to her madcap schemes and love of so many vivid dreams she drew you into. There was always something unquestionable in her belief that one day, no matter how much grief we'll encounter along the way, her people will be free. And just to explain, I'm a new son for about 35 years.
Okay, now we'll have the minute silence. Thank you, Bob. Okay, thank you. And yeah, Sean will be really greatly missed. What I'd like to do now is just sort of sum up really and say that all the information and any questions in the chat that didn't get answered or were sent in beforehand will actually try and answer, and we'll send out with the information after the meeting. Also, I'd like to say thank you for all our speakers. Thanks for speaking, and thank you everybody for coming to our meeting. And just to remind people that we have got a Reclaim Social Care Officers and Supporters meeting in December, and that's on the 10th of December at 3 till 5 p.m. So if you aren't a member of Reclaim Social Care and you'd like to come, then if you could put your email address in the chat now, so that we can actually send you out an invitation to that meeting. And again, thank you very much for coming and attending the meeting. I'd say the meeting's closed.
Thank you, Sandra, for chairing.